Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which period you're in. Today we're just going to be looking at what we started with yesterday with a simple interest formula. We're going to be looking at some story problems. And I want to look at both directions as far as whether you're receiving interest or paying interest. Because again, that's going to be our next topic we're going to talk about into next week is paying interest and not necessarily just getting it. All right, so it says Ben deposited $6,500 in a simple interest account. So there's our principal. That pays 2.8% interest, there's our rate, annually. So that's talking about every year. Annually means per year. If Ben leaves this money in the account for 12 years, well, there's our T, how much interest will he earn? So it's important to know what they're asking. Are they asking us for the interest or the ending balance? Well, they're just asking us for the interest. That means we can just plug the numbers into this formula, multiply, and we're done. All right, so it says Ben deposited $6,500, so that was our principal, $6,500. And our interest rate is 2.8%, so we have to move that decimal 2 spots, so that's 0.028. And then for 12 years. At this point, it just becomes a calculator problem. Again, you will definitely want access to a calculator. And I end up with an interest of $2,184. So again, that's just a simple bank account. Bank accounts don't quite pay that much interest. They pay a little lower than that, but again, it's pretty basic how it works. You just leave your money in the bank and they pay you for it. All right, now what about the other direction? What about borrowing money from the bank? So the second one says, Steph took out Steph took out a simple interest loan that charges 8.5% interest annually. Notice the difference. When you're borrowing money from the bank, the interest rates are always way higher than when you're leaving your money there. All right? If her original loan amount was for $30,000 and she's paying off her loan over 20 years, how much will she pay altogether? 20 years is a long time. When you do that, it's usually things like a house loan, because you have time to pay that off. You're not going to, plan on moving anytime soon. But a car, you don't probably keep the same car for 20 years. So a car loan you would do in a much shorter rate. So I'm actually going to do this problem a little bit differently than what it says. I'm going to do the answer, but I want to compare it in the end to something else. So let's just go ahead and work through it. All right, so it says how much does she pay altogether? So the altogether part, that's asking for that ending balance. How much does she owe altogether? All right, so let's start off with how much she borrowed. She borrowed $30,000, roughly the cost of a new car or a lower priced home. All right, now we're going to times that by the interest rate, 8.5%. So I have to move that decimal 2 locations, 0.085. And then how long? Well, she's going to do this for 20 years. All right, so let's find out how much interest is she going to pay. So she borrowed $30,000. 0.085, 20 years. So she's going to pay 51. Wait a minute, is that right? 51,000, other than the awful comma that I just put in there. $51,000 in interest alone. That's just how much money the bank is going to make off of her. All right, now how much is she actually going to pay altogether? That's that ending balance we talked about yesterday. And that's where I take the two numbers. I don't have room to write it here. I take the two numbers and add them together. That's an easy add. So that means that this house that she bought cost $30,000, but she ended up paying $81,000 for this house just because she borrowed the money for so long, 20 years. Plus 8.5, that's actually a pretty high interest rate for a long loan like that. All right, like I said, I wanted to add a little piece to that. Let's do the same exact problem, except let's talk about what happens if she does a simple thing like drop the length of the loan. Instead of doing the loan for 20 years, let's do the loan, if this was a car, most likely like 6 or 7 years is pretty typical on a car. 20 years is more common for a home because they're usually more expensive. So if I were to do this just at a 6-year rate, let's talk about what's different, how much of a different payment in the end that ends up being. So if I did that for 6 years, I'm going to pay about $15,300 in interest, meaning the ending balance would be $45,300. So Just by shortening the length of the loan, this person would save like $36,000 just by shortening the length of the loan. All right? I want to show you what the opposite thing would do. What would happen if it wasn't the length of the loan that was shortened? What if we shortened down that percentage? What if instead of paying this awful 8.5% percentage, a little more realistically, you could get a house for about 3.5% right now if you have a good credit. And we'll keep it at 20 years. We'll see how big of a difference changing that makes. So if I take that 30,000 times 0.035 and then keep the 20 years, I end up with a $21,000 interest payment, meaning the ending balance $51,000. I still saved $30,000. That's how important that interest rate is. Again, if you're buying a house or buying a car, that interest rate is the most important thing you can talk about. It can make a huge difference in how much money you actually pay for things. People who don't understand that end up getting completely ripped off when they buy their first car, when they buy their first home, when they take out a credit card. So those are going to be things we talk about in the upcoming weeks, is how to do that and how to do it properly to save you the most amount of money so you don't get ripped off. All right, so your work is like this today, just some story problems, making sure you can kind of see the situation and pick the pieces out. All right, good luck.